Yeah, baby. I'm done.
The courtroom in the Federal District of Northern Ohio was silent. It was a silence so profound, so heavy, that you could hear the low mechanical hum of the HVAC system and the scratching of a reporter's pen 3 rows back. 12 jurors sat in the box, their eyes fixed on a small wooden podium in the center of the room. The air was thick with the kind of tension that only accumulates when a life has been ruined, and a price tag is about to be placed on that ruin. Standing at that podium was Attorney Samuel Cross. He wasn't holding a stack of legal precedents. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a single purple grape. He held it up to the harsh fluorescent light of the courtroom, letting the jury see its perfect spherical shape. It was delicate. It was organic. It was something you would find in a child's lunchbox. This, Cross said, his voice low and rumbling like distant thunder, is the human eye. It is a miracle of biology. It can see the stars. It can see a child's face. It can perceive a million shades of color, but structurally, it is no stronger than this fruit. He paused, looking at the defendant's table, where Sergeant Derek Vane sat in a crisp suit that seemed too tight across his shoulders, looking indifferent, perhaps even bored. And it takes 250 pounds of pressure per square inch to destroy it, Cross continued, turning back to the jury. To turn a miracle into pulp, he squeezed. The sound was wet and small, barely a pop. Juice ran down his thumb. The grape was gone, replaced by a smeared mess of skin and fluid. That, Cross whispered, dropping the remains onto a napkin, is what Officer Vane did to Elias Thorne. Not because he had to, not because there was a danger, but because he was bored, because he was excited, because he wanted to hunt. This is the story of a Tuesday afternoon that should have been forgettable. It is the story of a roofing job, a missing tool, and a police department that decided to treat a quiet suburban street like a war zone. It is the story of how a man's sight was stolen by the very people sworn to protect him, and how a jury decided that the price of an eye, and the price of human dignity, was $4.5 million. But before we walk through the streets of Oak Creek and witness the moment everything changed, I want to ask you a question. When you see a police cruiser speed past you with lights and sirens, do you feel safe? Or do you feel afraid? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe that a badge shouldn't be a license to brutalize, hit that subscribe button. We are building a record of accountability here, one story at a time, and you won't want to miss what comes next. To understand the tragedy of September 14th, 2021, you first have to understand the geography of Oak Creek, Ohio. It is a bedroom community. The kind of place where the lawns are manicured to within an inch of their lives, where the fences are white vinyl, and where the crime rate is so low that the police blotter is usually filled with noise complaints and teenagers loitering at the gas station. It is a place designed for comfort, for safety, for the quiet raising of families. But for some, peace is just another word for boredom. And for others, peace is a fragile thing that can be shattered by simply walking down the street while wearing the wrong clothes. Elias Thorne was 32 years old. He was a man who carried the map of a hard life on his face. He had rough hands, the kind you get from hauling shingles up a ladder for 10 hours a day, every day, under the baking sun. He had a past, struggles with addiction, run-ins with the law in his 20s, but he was fighting, clawing his way toward a future. He was sober, he was working, he was trying to be the man his family needed him to be. He was a roofer, a job that requires a specific kind of toughness, a job where you are constantly exposed to the elements, where your back aches constantly, and one wrong step can end your career. That morning, the air was crisp, hinting at the coming autumn. Elias was working with his friend and foreman, Marcus. They were prepping for a job in a nearby neighborhood when they realized they were short on tools. It was a simple oversight, the kind that happens on job sites every day. I left the pry bars at my place, Marcus said, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a gloved hand. It's just a few blocks over. We can walk it, grab 'em, and head to the site. It was a sensible decision. Why drive the heavy work truck, navigate the narrow suburban streets, and lose a prime parking spot? So, the two men started walking. They were dressed for work. Heavy boots, stained jeans, hoodies to protect against the wind. They were walking through Oak Creek, cutting through the side streets to get to Marcus's backyard. They were two youngish men walking with purpose, looking a little rough around the edges. In many places in America, this is just Tuesday. In Oak Creek, to the eyes of a woman watching from her kitchen window, this was an invasion. Mrs. Higgins lived on Elm Street. She was a woman who spent a lot of time on community watch apps, reading reports about suspicious vehicles that usually turned out to be lost Amazon delivery drivers. She saw Elias and Marcus cut across the edge of a lawn, a shortcut Marcus had taken 1,000 times because he lived just a street over. She didn't wave. She didn't open the window to ask if they needed help. She didn't recognize Marcus, her own neighbor, perhaps because of the hood, or perhaps because she didn't want to. She picked up her phone, but she didn't call 911. 911 is for emergencies, fires, heart attacks, active shooters. Deep down, Mrs. Higgins knew this wasn't an emergency. She knew she was just uncomfortable, so she dialed the non-emergency line of the Oak Creek Police Department. Yes, she told the dispatcher, her voice low, peering through her blinds. There are 2 men. Boys, maybe. I don't know. They're walking through backyards. They look suspicious. Are they breaking into anything? The dispatcher asked, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. No, Mrs. Higgins admitted. They're just walking. But they don't look like they live here. They're cutting through yards. Okay, the dispatcher said, with the weary tone of someone who took 20 of these calls a week. We'll send a car by to check it out. Community policing. A car. Singular, a drive-by to wave and say, "Stay out of the flower beds, fellas." That was what was required. That was what was proportional. That was what a reasonable society would expect. But that is not what happened. The call went out over the radio. And in the Oak Creek police station, something shifted. The boredom of the afternoon shift evaporated. The adrenaline spiked. It was as if a match had been dropped into a pool of gasoline. You see, for Officer Derek Vane and his squad, the day had been excruciatingly dull. They were tactically trained. They were equipped for war. They had the Chargers with the V8 engines. They had the tactical vests. They had the tasers and the sidearms. They were hammers looking for a nail, and Mrs. Higgins had just whispered that there might be a nail on Elm Street. Instead of one car rolling by at 25 miles per hour, the department sent the cavalry. 6 cruisers scrambled. The radio chatter wasn't calm, it was frantic. Engines roared to life in the precinct lot. Sirens wailed, cutting through the suburban quiet like jagged knives. They weren't responding to a suspicious person call. They were driving as if they were intercepting a bank robbery crew or a violent fugitive. Elias and Marcus had retrieved the tools. They were walking back toward the bus stop to head to the job site. Elias was carrying a bag of tools. He was thinking about his paycheck. He was thinking about what he was going to eat for dinner. He was thinking about the shingles he had to lay. Then he heard the sirens. At first, he thought they were for a fire. But then he saw the first cruiser careen around the corner, tires screeching, drifting into the oncoming lane to bypass a slow-moving minivan. Then another. Then a third. They were converging. And they were looking at him. Elias Thorne froze. His heart, which had been beating a steady rhythm, began to hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. You have to understand Elias's history. To him, the police were not helpers. They were an occupying force. They were the source of his worst memories. He had been clean. He had been doing good. But the sight of a wall of blue lights didn't trigger a feeling of safety. It triggered a profound biological trauma response. "Marcus," Elias whispered, his voice trembling. I can't do this." "It's fine, man," Marcus said, though he looked nervous too, clutching the pry bar. "We didn't do anything. We're just working." "They don't care," Elias said. "The fight or flight response is a primal mechanism. It overrides logic. It overrides reason. It is hardwired into the oldest parts of our brain." And Elias's brain was screaming one word: run. He didn't run immediately. He turned. He started walking away, briskly, heading toward the fence line, away from the screaming sirens, away from the flashing lights that felt like predator eyes. Officer Derek Vane saw the movement. Vane was 34 years old, built like a linebacker, with a reputation in the department for being proactive. That's the polite word. The other word, the one whispered in the locker room, was aggressive. Vane slammed his cruiser into park before it had fully stopped, the transmission grinding in protest. He kicked the door open. He didn't assess the situation. He didn't ask a question. He saw a man walking away, and the predator instinct kicked in. He didn't activate his loudspeaker. He activated his lungs. "I'm gonna tase you," Vane screamed. It wasn't a warning, it was a promise. "I'm gonna tase you, dude. Yeah, baby." Let's pause on that. Yeah, baby. Those were the words captured on his body camera. Not "stop police," not "drop the bag," but "yeah, baby." It was a war cry. It was the sound of a man who was treating a human being like a trophy buck in hunting season. It was the sound of excitement, of a game finally beginning. Elias heard the scream. He heard the joy in the officer's voice, and the terror took over completely. He dropped the tools. He ran. He ran toward a chain-link fence that separated the yards. He wasn't running to escape a crime. He was running to escape a predator. He was running because everything in his life had taught him that when that tone of voice is directed at you, pain is coming. Vane sprinted after him. He was fast, fueled by the thrill of the chase. Get back here. You're done. You're done. Elias hit the fence. He scrambled up the metal mesh. He was agile, but fear makes you clumsy. He vaulted over the top, his boots catching slightly, and he tumbled onto the grass on the other side. He landed hard. The wind was knocked out of him. He didn't get up to keep running. He curled up. He surrendered. He knew it was over. He lay on the grass expecting handcuffs. He expected to be yelled at. He expected to be arrested for running. Officer Vane reached the fence a second later. He didn't climb it. He vaulted it with the ease of an athlete. He landed on the other side, towering over the prone form of Elias Thorne. The body camera footage, which would later be analyzed frame by forensic experts in a quiet room, showed exactly what happened next. Elias was not fighting. He was not reaching for a weapon. He was curled in a fetal position, his hands coming up to cover his head, the universal sign of submission. He was making himself small. Officer Vane didn't pull his taser. He didn't pull his cuffs. He pulled back his right fist. It was a calculated, massive swing. Vane put his entire body weight behind it, dropping his hips to generate maximum torque. It wasn't a restraint technique. It wasn't a compliance strike found in any manual. It was a haymaker. It was a sucker punch thrown by a man who believed no one would ever hold him accountable. The fist connected with the left side of Elias's face. There was a sound, a wet, sickening crunch, that the microphone picked up clearly, even over the officer's heavy breathing. It was the sound of the orbital bone shattering. It was the sound of the sinus cavity collapsing. And, as the doctors would later testify, it was the sound of the globe of the left eye rupturing under extreme hydraulic pressure. Elias didn't scream. Not yet. The shock was too profound. His world simply went white, and then, on the left side, it went permanently black. We are now at the halfway point of this story. The adrenaline of the chase is over, and now the reality of the damage is setting in. It's a moment that makes you wonder, at what point does policing stop and assault begin? If you're finding this story compelling, take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us expose these injustices to a wider audience. And tell me, do you think running from the police should ever justify physical force when no crime has been committed? Elias was on the ground. The pain was beginning to break through the shock, a searing, blinding agony that radiated from his face to the back of his skull. It felt as if a spike had been driven into his brain. "Turn around," Vane screamed, grabbing Elias's limp arm and wrenching it behind his back. "Stop resisting." "I'm done. I'm done," Elias sobbed, his voice ragged with pain. "Please, my eye, my eye." Vane cuffed him. He knelt on Elias's back, pressing his full tactical weight into the roofer's spine. Other officers were arriving now, vaulting the fence or running around the perimeter. They stood over the scene, a circle of uniforms looking down at the broken man. "You shouldn't have run, buddy," one of them said, his voice devoid of empathy. Elias was panicking. His vision in his left eye was gone. There was just a field of red static. He could feel blood pouring down his cheek, warm and metallic. His mind, scrambling for a way to survive, for a way to explain the impending death he felt was coming, latched onto a lie. He needed them to take him to a doctor, not a cell. "I swallowed it," Elias gasped. "I swallowed the heroin. Please, I don't want to die." He hadn't swallowed anything. There was no heroin. He was sober. But in his terrified, concussed brain, he thought that if he told them he had overdosed, they would have to take him to a hospital immediately. He thought it was the only way to save his life. "Oh, you swallowed drugs?" Vane laughed. It was a cruel sound. "Well, that was stupid. Now you're gonna die? Good job." "Please," Elias begged, "help me." The paramedics were called, not for the eye initially, but for the phantom overdose. When the EMTs arrived, the tone of the scene changed instantly. The lead paramedic, a woman named Sarah with 20 years on the job, knelt beside Elias. She saw the blood. She shined her penlight into his face. She recoiled. "Officer," she said, her voice tight, looking up at Vane. "His eye is destroyed." "He fell," Vane said quickly, the excuse ready on his lips. "He hit the fence when he jumped." Sarah looked at the fence. Then she looked at the specific devastating impact on Elias's face. She knew what a fence injury looked like. This wasn't a scrape. This was a blunt force trauma impact. She looked at Vane's knuckles. She didn't say anything. She still had to work with these cops every day, but she noted it in her chart, trauma consistent with strike. They loaded Elias into the ambulance. The doors closed, sealing him in with the sterile smell of antiseptic and the throbbing, life-altering pain. Back at the station, the report was already being written. The blue wall was being constructed brick by brick. Subject fled. Subject resisted. Officer utilized compliance strike to gain control. Subject sustained injury during fall. It was a standard narrative. It was designed to check every box for qualified immunity. It was designed to make the violence look like procedure. And 99 times out of 100, that narrative holds. 99 times out of 100, the suspect takes a plea deal, the eye heals, or doesn't, and the officer goes back to patrol. But this was the 100th time. Elias Thorne didn't take a plea deal. He went to the hospital, where surgeons spent 6 hours trying to save his eye. They failed. The structure was too damaged. The vision was gone forever. He was left with a prosthetic shell and a lifetime of darkness on his left side. And then he went to see attorney Samuel Cross. Samuel Cross was a civil rights litigator who looked like a linebacker and spoke like a preacher. He had a reputation for taking the cases nobody else wanted, the cases where the victim wasn't a choir boy, where the police report seemed ironclad. "They say I resisted, mister." Cross, Elias said, sitting in the lawyer's office weeks later, wearing dark sunglasses to hide the injury. "But I didn't. I gave up." "I believe you," Cross said. "But belief doesn't win in federal court. Evidence wins." Cross filed the lawsuit. Thorne versus Vane et al. He alleged excessive force, battery, and violation of the Fourth Amendment. The discovery phase was a war. The city of Oak Creek fought tooth and nail. They delayed releasing the footage. They claimed the heroin statement proved Elias was a dangerous junkie. They tried to smear his character. They dug up his old records. But then, Cross got the body camera video. He watched it in his office late one night. He saw the chase. He heard the "yeah, baby." And then he slowed the footage down, frame by frame. He saw the fence. He saw Elias land. He saw Elias curl up. And he saw Officer Vane cross the fence. There was no pause. There was no attempt to grab Elias's arms. There was just the punch. It was immediate. It was punitive. It was the action of a man punishing defiance, not a man securing a suspect. "Gotcha," Cross whispered. The trial began 2 years later. The defense strategy was aggressive. They painted Elias as a criminal, a drug addict, despite the toxicology report coming back clean, 0 drugs in his system. They argued that Officer Vane feared for his life, that he thought Elias was reaching for a weapon in his waistband. He was a fleeing felon, the city attorney argued, pointing at Elias. Officer Vane made a split-second decision to protect the community. Police work is messy. It is violent. If you don't want to get hurt, don't run. But Cross had a different strategy. He didn't focus on Elias. He focused on the physics of the punch and the mindset of the officer. He called an expert witness, a renowned ophthalmologist. "Doctor," Cross asked on the stand, "could a fall from a 4-foot fence cause this injury?" "Absolutely not," the doctor replied, adjusting his glasses. "The orbital bone is incredibly strong. To blow out the floor of the orbit and rupture the globe requires a concentrated, high-velocity impact, like a baseball bat or a very strong fist." "How much force?" "Roughly 250 pounds per square inch." That was when Cross introduced the grape. He stood before the jury during his closing argument. He recounted the war cry of the officer. He reminded them of the 6 cars sent for 2 walking men. He reminded them that the only crime Elias committed was walking while looking poor. Officer Vane wasn't policing, Cross told the jury, holding the grape up to the light one last time. He was playing a game, and Elias Thorne was the toy he broke. He squeezed the grape. The visual was visceral. The jury flinched. The sound of the squish echoed in the quiet room. "They want you to believe this was an accident," Cross said, wiping the juice from his hand with a slow, deliberate motion. "They want you to believe that a man curled in a ball is a threat. They want you to believe that blinding a citizen is the cost of doing business in Oak Creek. I'm asking you to tell them that the price is too high." The jury deliberated for 8 hours. In civil rights cases, victory is rare. Qualified immunity is a high bar. You have to prove that the officer violated a clearly established right. You have to prove it wasn't a mistake, but a violation. When the jury returned, Officer Vane stood up. He looked confident. He was still on the force. In fact, in the 2 years since the incident, he had been promoted to sergeant. The department had cleared him of all wrongdoing. He expected the same from these 12 civilians. "Have you reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor. In the matter of Thorne versus Vane, how do you find?" "We find for the plaintiff, Elias Thorne." Vane's face went slack. The arrogance evaporated. And what damages do you award? We award compensatory damages in the amount of $2.5 million and punitive damages in the amount of $2 million. $4.5 million. It was a staggering sum. It was a message. The courtroom erupted in a low murmur. Elias Thorne, sitting at the plaintiff's table, put his head in his hands and wept. He wouldn't get his sight back. He wouldn't get the years of fear back. But he had the truth. The world finally knew what had happened in that backyard. The aftermath of the verdict was bittersweet. The taxpayers of Oak Creek would foot the bill for the settlement, but the check didn't come from Officer Vane's pocket. And the most shocking part, Sergeant Derek Vane kept his badge. He kept his promotion. The internal investigation stood by its finding that the force was within policy. The union protected him. The system absorbed the blow of the verdict and kept moving. Elias Thorne bought a small house with his settlement. He started a small business, no longer able to do roofing due to his depth perception. He lives quietly, but every time he looks in the mirror, every time he shaves, he sees the reminder of that Tuesday. He sees the glass eye that stares back, unblinking. And somewhere in Oak Creek, Sergeant Vane is still patrolling. He is still driving that Charger. He is still looking for the next call. This story leaves us with a heavy question. The jury did their job. The lawyer did his job. But did the system work? If a man can cost a city $4.5 million for blinding an innocent man and still get a promotion, what does that say about accountability? Is a financial payout justice? Or is it just hush money paid by the public to cover the sins of the state? What would you do if you were on that jury? And more importantly, what would you do if you saw those lights in your rearview mirror? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want to keep shining a light on the stories they try to bury, make sure you're subscribed. Until next time, stay safe and know your rights.